First on Venezuela, what can you tell us about this Venezuelan boat that was taken out? And do you plan to provide proof that these were narco-terrorists who were on their way to the U.S.?
Well, we have proof. All you have to do is look at the cargo that was, like, it's spattered all over the ocean. Big bags of cocaine and fentanyl all over the place. And it was, plus we have recorded evidence that they were leaving. We've recorded them. It's very careful because we know you people would be after us. We're very careful. The military has been amazing. And General Kane showed me a little while ago the clip, but you could actually see it. But you don't have to see it because we have recorded proof and evidence. We know what time they were leaving, when they were leaving, what they had, and all of the other things that you'd like to have. But we have noticed that there are no ships in the ocean anymore. We're seeing that there's like no ships, no, you know, when the first one we went, there were hundreds of boats. Now there are no boats. I wonder why. Now, what does that mean? That means there's no drugs coming by sea, but they do come by land. And you know what? We're telling the cartels right now, we're going to be stopping them too. When they come by land, we're going to be stopping them the same way we stop the boats. And you'll see that, but maybe by talking about it a little bit, it won't happen. If it doesn't happen, that's good. But they killed 300,000 people in our country last year, and we're not letting it happen anymore.
And then on Israel,
Yeah, baby, we are kicking. It is 6:50 in the p.m. here on Friday, September the 26th, 2025. That is our President, Donald John Trump, talking about Venezuela. One thing that is that's funny about the way that Donald Trump talks about all this is that virtually all of the fentanyl that comes into this country, all the drugs that come to this country come from Colombia through Mexico. Venezuela is so minuscule. Like, I think it's 3% of the drugs that come into this country come from Venezuela. But fentanyl basically comes from China and from Mexico. Cocaine comes from Colombia. Most of it. Like 97% of all of it. Like, Venezuela has such a small imprint on the drug game in this country. And most importantly, they couldn't sell the drugs if Americans didn't want them. The demand is the issue. The demand is the issue, fundamentally. But Trump is not going to say that. Trump is pretty preoccupied with trying to overthrow Venezuela's government. But this isn't a new thing. This isn't a new thing at all. The United States of America has been trying to subvert Venezuela's sovereignty for many years now. There is a long, long history between our two countries. But really, the root of all of this goes back to the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine was announced by President James Monroe in 1823. He declared the Western Hemisphere, the entire thing, the entire Western Hemisphere, as off limits to colonization from the European powers. They were all warned not to establish new colonies or interfere with the independent nations. This separated the European and American sphere of influence, and so in return, the U.S. promised it would not meddle in existing European colonies. But what it really did was essentially say that the entire Western Hemisphere, the United States of America has sovereignty over. The entire thing, from Canada all the way down to Chile and the Falkland Islands. And with that mentality, the United States has consistently been meddling in Venezuela. In the early 1900s, U.S. oil companies were granted concessions by their dictator, the dictator in Venezuela, Juan Vicente Gomez, and pioneered what would become Venezuela's main cash cow. The oil link between the two countries would live on for many decades, even as Venezuela established its own oil-producing company, Petróleos de Venezuela, or PDVSA, and future governments sought to capture a larger share of the community's resource wealth. As a result of this friendly policy towards the United States for much of the early 20th century, Venezuela escaped much of the damage the U.S. inflicted on other Latin American countries like Chile and Guatemala, where we regularly would assassinate their leaders or overthrow their governments, or assassinate their leaders and overthrow their governments. So you see a lot of Venezuela talking about how great things used to be in Venezuela. That is because the United States said, all right, we'll leave you alone. Like a mob boss walking through Little Italy. You know, he takes a calzone from a bakery and says, this is a good calzone. I'll leave you alone today. Thank you, Don America. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Uncle Sam. Thank you, Don Uncle Sam. And so ultimately, for much of the 20th century, Venezuela escaped the type of horrific damage that most of the other countries in the Western Hemisphere got, like being occupied and having their governments consistently overthrown. Now, things changed when Director Marcos Pérez Jiménez overthrew the elected president Romulo Gallegos and seized power in the 1948 coup d'etat. During this prosperity, foreign investment, particularly from the American oil companies, grew along with the support from the Jiménez regime. This anti-communist, here we go again, the obsession with communism, regime allowed and supported the exploitation of the country's natural resources by the American oil industry as a portion of the profits made from its companies like Mobil, Exxon, to the personal coffers of the dictator. So the dictator, we were paying him. Our companies were paying him while he was, essentially lording over Venezuela for us. He actually received the Legion of Merit from the U.S. government in 1954 for being a dictator. So when all those people tell you that the United States doesn't like dictators and we don't do business with dictators, that's a damn lie. And it's always been a damn lie. We've helped put dictators in charge. We've helped keep dictators in charge. Augusto Pinochet in Chile, for one. Now, while this was happening, under Jimenez, the Seguridad Nacional tortured thousands, and disappeared thousands of people, both in its headquarters in Caracas and in a confinement camp on Guasina Island in the jungles of the Orinoco. Now, after the 1958 coup d'etat, when Pérez Jiménez abandoned the government and the country on January the 23rd, 1958, more than 400 prisoners were found in the basement of the headquarters. Good God. So that's the dictator we were supporting. So mind you, they talk about Maduro. Oh my God, Maduro's such a dictator. Nicolas Maduro's the worst guy in the world. Donald Trump just put a $10 million bounty on his head because he's such a horrible dictator and we literally were supporting a guy, our government was supporting a guy who, when they ran him out of town, they found hundreds of people in a dungeon being tortured by him and his people. Relations basically cooled at that point. You know, there really wasn't a whole lot going on in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. But in the 90s, this is where the United States and Venezuela started to be antagonistic towards each other. When Hugo Chavez was first elected the president of Venezuela by a landslide in 1998, they started to reassert sovereignty over their own resources, their own oil. Chavez says, this is our oil. Why do we have to give it to America? Why do we have to let them tell us what to do? This action challenged the comfortable position held by the U.S. economic interest for almost 100 years. So for 100 years, American companies were basically able to use Venezuela as their own personal shopping mart. And Hugo Chavez cut that off. That's why they had a problem with Fidel Castro as well. Before Fidel Castro took over Cuba, Cuba was known as the brothel of the Caribbean. American businessmen and businessmen from Europe used to come to Cuba and basically do whatever the hell they wanted. Like, seriously. They could gamble. They could have sex with all kinds of women and children, and they often did. Cuba was basically seen as a brothel. Venezuela was seen as just a place where Exxon and Mobil and all these people could get their cheap oil to sell on the market. And if they had to have dictators in place to make sure that could happen, continue to happen, and so be it. And when you have people like Fidel Castro and Che Guevara or Hugo Chavez who cut that off, the United States government, Don America, good old Uncle Sam, says, how dare you? How dare you try to reassert dominance over your own resources? Those are my women. That's my oil. The Chavez administration at this point overturned the privatization of the state oil company, PDVSA. They raised royalties for foreign firms and eventually doubled the country's GDP. Those oil revenues were used to fund social programs aimed at fostering human development in areas like health, education, employment, housing, technology, culture, pensions, and access to safe drinking water. And that's how at one point in the mid-2000s, Venezuela became the happiest country on the planet. Look it up. They were the happiest country in the world at one point under Hugo Chavez. Which, of course, ticked America off because his public friendship and significant trade relationship with Fidel Castro and Cuba undermined the U.S. policy of isolating Cuba. Also, long-running ties between the U.S. and Venezuela militaries were severed. During Venezuela's presidency of OPEC, which is the oil-producing countries, the organization of oil-producing countries, in 2000, Chavez made a 10-hour tour of OPEC countries. In the process, he became the first head of state to meet with Saddam Hussein since the Gulf War. The visit was controversial in America, even though Chavez did respect the ban on international flights to and from Iraq as he drove from his previous stop in Iran. So, at this point, Hugo Chavez is persona non grata. We even had him kidnapped at one point. Like, that's another thing that they don't tell you about. Our government had Hugo Chavez kidnapped and thrown in jail when he came into power. And the people of Venezuela went to the prison and demanded, like they were literally going to lynch all those soldiers who were holding him at our behest. They forced him to be released. The quality of life of Venezuelans had also improved, at least temporarily, according to the UN index. The Gini coefficient, which is a measure of income inequality, dropped from 0.495 in 1998 to 0.39 in 2011, putting Venezuela only behind Canada in the Western Hemisphere. 95% of Venezuelans could also read and write. They had a higher literacy rate than we do. The poverty rate fell from 48.6% in 1999 to 32.1% in 2013. Between 1998 and 2006, malnutrition deaths fell by 50%. Chavez also expropriated and redistributed 5 million acres of farmland from large landowners, which, of course, again, was another thing that ticked off American interests, just like when Robert Mugabe did it. Also, his opposition to Zionism. He was a very big critic of Israel and held close relations with Iran. So, of course, they called him an anti-Semite, as all of the blue and white countries' critics are smeared with eventually. You know, if you criticize the blue and white country, they call you a anti-Semite, which is funny because the Palestinians are the real Semites. Most of the Israelis are from Poland and Russia and Germany. The Palestinians, and this has been shown by DNA tests, have far more links to the Levant and that area of the Middle East than the people from Europe do, who currently occupy that space. During Hurricane Katrina, Hugo Chavez, while our government, the United States of American government, allowed black people to drown and to starve, Hugo Chavez actually offered aid to all those people that were drowning or who were dying in the Superdome and could not get any food or anything else. Hugo Chavez offered aid and assistance to those people. So, of course, that really made him mad. That really ticked off our government. And so, ultimately, Hugo Chavez dies in 2013. His vice president, Nicolas Maduro, took over and has been in power ever since and has continued on some level Chavismo. He's not as, I say he's not as talented as Hugo Chavez was, not as good of a leader either, keep it 100, as Hugo Chavez was. But that's not the issue that the United States has with him. The United States wants his oil. You don't believe me? Donald Trump himself said it. This is what Donald Trump had himself. Again, you let Trump talk long enough, he will tell you what the hell is going on.
How about we're buying oil from Venezuela? When I left, Venezuela was ready to collapse. We would have taken it over. We would have gotten all that oil. It would have been right next door. But now we're buying oil from Venezuela, so we're making a dictator very rich. Can you believe this? Nobody can believe it. You know where the oil, their oil is garbage. It's horrible. The worst you can get. Tar. It's like tar. And to refine it, you need special plants. And these people.
So there you go. Donald Trump said we were going to make them collapse. We were going to take their oil. And that's what it's always been about. Just tell the truth. That's what it was always about. Stealing their oil. It was always about stealing their oil. All this talk about dictatorships, as I said earlier, we literally helped their dictator who was torturing people in the basement. But he worked for us, so we didn't care. And now you have the gusanos who come from Latin America, the whitewashed gusanos who come from Latin America, like Marco Rubio, who wants to overthrow Cuba, who wants to overthrow Venezuela, who wants to overthrow any country in Latin America that isn't completely subservient to the United States' interest. It just so happens to be that he's the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor. So it looks like he might get his way. We've already started bombing vessels coming from Venezuela, saying that they're drug ships when there hasn't been any evidence whatsoever proof of that. We've blamed everything on Trim de Agua and said that Nicolas Maduro is running it. Why he'd be running it is beyond me. Again, as I said earlier, a microscopic amount of the drugs that come into this country come from Venezuela. The overwhelming majority of it comes from Mexico through Colombia or from China in the case of fentanyl. Donald Trump's not about to bomb Mexico. He's not about to bomb China. I know he ain't crazy enough to bomb China. He don't want those problems. So they are picking on Venezuela, trying to overthrow their government. So as Donald Trump said, we can take their oil. We were going to get all that oil. And so it's important to understand that, again, the people who run this country do not care about who's a dictator. They don't have any morals. They don't have any values. They don't work for us. They work for Mobil and Exxon Mobil. They work for the oil companies. They work for the defense contractors. It seems like most of them work for Israel at this point. What we want in this country, what we need doesn't really matter. This is all about a self-serving desire to enrich themselves and enrich their corporate donors. So it's important that as our government ramps up the rhetoric against Venezuela, because that is happening, that you don't bite. Don't give them the consent that they need to go and destroy another country. Donald Trump said that he was the anti-war president. That's what he said. He said he was the anti-war president. And yet he's about to go and destroy another country. And what do you think is going to happen when we destroy Venezuela? Where do you think all those people are going to go? They're going to come up here in mass. We're already absorbing tons of Venezuelan immigrants. It's going to be even worse once we overthrow the country and Trin de Agua really does take over all of Venezuela. We'll be talking about the Venezuelans the way that we talked about Griselda Blanco and the Colombians back in the 80s when they pretty much took over the city of Miami and were murdering thousands of people. So again, it's important to not buy the propaganda. I even see black people sometimes buying the propaganda of the corporate media. Oh man, such and such is a socialist, such and such is a communist. All that has always been scare tactics. It has always been about scaring you and manufacturing consent into destroying countries that have never done a damn thing to you. Socialists and communists didn't enslave your ancestors. Socialists and communists ain't responsible for Jim Crow. They're not responsible for the prison industrial complex where black men are the most incarcerated people on planet Earth. They're not the police officers who are keeping their kneeling on George Floyd's neck for 10 minutes or shooting Breonna Taylor. Those people in those countries have a right to have any type of government they want. If they want to be socialist, that is their business. They want to be communist, that is their business. It is not our problem. Don't let Trump or any of these other people manufacture the consent they need to destroy another country at our expense. Because you're going to pay for it. You best believe we going to pay for it. All right, folks. Man, this first hour went by. It is already 7:13 in the PM. So let's do what it do. It's time. It's time for the Happy Happies. We'll be right back after these on Straight Out of the Cannon with me, Scott Cannon. Don't go nowhere.